There's a few different sparks that came together to make me want to write this book. And one of them was the discovery that Joseph Campbell, or Joe Campbell, I'm so glad that you fell for the Joe Campbell thing. I'm so glad, because that was very deliberate.
All right, well, welcome back to part 2 of Alex Hutchinson interview, the author of The Explorer's Gene, Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. If this is your first time joining us here on the Coaching Lab podcast, welcome. My name is Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching. If you have any questions on the coaching front, you can always check out the website at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. We've got the trainings coming up. We've got the resources available to you, a lot of them free. So maybe worth checking out if you're heading that way in your career. If you missed part 1 of this interview, just go back to the last episode, click play. It's worth hearing that one first. It sets the stage for everything we talk about over this episode. And I think you're going to really enjoy what you have to hear. Alex has so many insights. He is one of our rare returning guests, and he does a fantastic job as always. So with that, let's jump into part 2 of the interview with Dr. Alex Hutchinson regarding the explorer's gene. In your Explore versus Exploit chapter, I underlined the rule from the Columbia University mathematicians that you can keep regret to a minimum by, in quotes, always choosing the option with the biggest potential upside. That seems way too easy. Like that advice is like, yeah, it looks good on a poster. Wait, like can you talk us through that concept and how to actually apply it?
Yeah, so this is something called the upper confidence bound algorithm, which is sometimes kind of parsed as optimism in the face of uncertainty. That by being generally optimistic when you're facing uncertain choices, you'll be happier. And you can make a hand waving kind of experiential argument for this by saying, like, what do you regret most? Do you regret the times when you didn't have the nerve to ask someone for a date, or when you did and they said no? And I would say most people don't spend a lot of time looking back 30 years and saying, oh man, I can't believe that person said no to me. But they might spend some time occasionally on a lonely Friday night saying, I really should have asked her, for a dance or whatever. So we tend to, and that's an example of, like, you regret the things that you did defensively, not the things that you did optimistically. Now, as you said, this is actually a mathematical thing. And where does this come in? There's a sort of toy problem that mathematicians and decision scientists use to study explore exploit decision making. It's called the multi-armed bandit setup, which is basically the idea that you're walking into a casino. There's a bunch of slot machines, and the usual setup is each of these slot machines has a characteristic. Some are better than others. Some might pay out 80% of the time. Some might pay out 20% of the time. Some might pay out 50% of the time, but you don't know what their characteristics are. The only way you can find out is by playing each one and trying to figure out, this one's, I got 4 out of 5. Was that just a streak of luck, or does this one pay out 80% of the time? Or I got 1 out of 5. Is this a dud, or did I just get a streak of? So it's a hard problem. It's an explore exploit problem. Like, how do you spend your money? Do you keep exploring to try and really figure out what the best machine is? Or at a certain point, you just say, all right, I think this one's the best. Let's stop wasting money on the ones that I don't think are as good, and let's just put all my money onto this one. And solving that problem is enormously difficult mathematically, depending on what assumptions you make about it. It was one of the most famous math problems in decision science, at least for 4 or 5 decades. And there was a solution in the 70s called the Gittins index, but it's so unwieldy and has so many assumptions required that it's not really useful it's useful in some industrial contexts, but it's not really useful when you're deciding whether to ask someone for a date. So mathematicians were like, if we can't have a perfect solution, what's the best heuristic? What's the best kind of rough approximation that will give us the best results? And so what they found is, okay, first of all, regret. Sorry, I'm going into the weeds on this, but
no, that's okay. I mean, that was actually my next question. So you're good. Risk, ambiguity, yes. that whole tie-in.
So regret in a mathematical sense is, what's the difference between in the slot machine example, what's the difference between how much money you won and how much you could have won if you'd magically known what the right machine to pull was every time? Now, nobody has a crystal ball, so you can never eliminate regret. There's always going to be some decisions that you get wrong or that weren't as good. So regret always increases, but you can keep its increase to a minimum if you follow this approach called the upper confidence bound algorithm, which, let's see. Again, this is one of those things that's hard to explain without reference to PowerPoint. But basically, what it amounts to is what you said right at the beginning. It's you pick the option with the greatest realistic upside. Now, that doesn't mean you take the option where there's a 1 in a million. You don't buy the lottery ticket because there's a 1 in a million chance. But so if you think of the error, let's say one machine, it pays it pays out 50% of the time, plus or minus 5%. So it might be 55, it might be 45%. And you have another one that only seems to pay out 40% of the time, but there's much greater uncertainty. It might actually be 60% or it might be 20%. You pick the second one because the higher error bar is the 60% on the second one rather than the 55% on the first one. So it's the top of the error bars that you're looking at. And so rather than looking at the average payout, like I think this one's 50% versus I think this one's 40%, you're saying this one could be as high as 55%. And this one could be as high as 60%. Pick the one with the higher error bar, and you'll be guaranteed to have regret grow as slowly as possible in the long term. So, and you translate that by saying it's worth being optimistic when you don't know what the outcome is, rather than focusing on what the most likely outcome is, focus on what the best possible outcome is within reasonable bounds of like. So when you're talking about error bars, often it's what's called 90% confidence intervals. So the top of the error bar is like, I'm 90% sure it's going to be within this range. So let's pick that. You're not picking, again, the 1 in a million long shot.
Right. You asked the question midway through the book, is exploration a young person's game? I want to run down that path a little bit in some aspects of life. You make the note that older subjects explored less overall than younger ones. You make the connection to fitness, and about 50% or so, 1% a year loss is due to habits versus actually being directly tied to age-induced. So fitness-wise, this makes strength training, speed work, that kind of stuff, even more important with each passing year. It's great at all phases, but it's more valuable as you get older. Is that same thing holding true for the exploration muscle? It's actually more valuable for the 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old to step out of that comfort zone because of the pliability, the flexibility, the ability to stretch that more, or in our fitness example, strengthen more and decrease that loss that's occurring?
That's what I thought the answer would be. And I, basically every scientist I spoke to, I asked this question, and it was very hard to get, nobody knows the answer, but it was a little less obvious than I expected that. So in the fitness analogy, it's like, there's no benefit to sitting around on the couch more. It's like, when you get to be 60, you really need to spend more time watching reruns on the sofa. You can if you want, if you enjoy it, but there's no big picture benefit to that. With exploring and exploiting, the counter argument is that, again, this idea that if you're just exploring all the time, you're never actually getting the benefits of what you explored. You spent all this time. So let's take it back to music. You've been really diligent about discovering new music. You're never just getting stuck in the same rut. But if your rule is such that you never listen to the same song twice, you're like, I'm always going to explore.
Right.
Wow, this song is amazing. I just discovered this great song, but I'm never going to listen to it again because I need to keep exploring. I've already heard it once. We can see immediately that that's kind of an illogical perspective. Part of the reason you're exploring is so you can discover the things that you love, and so that then you can return to those things and enjoy them. And so there is a perspective that it does make sense that by the time you're a grown-up, much less an older adult, you probably it makes sense to be exploring less than you did when you were 5 because you've already explored a lot of things. You know a lot of things. So one of the examples, a guy named Charlie Wu, who's a scientist in Germany who studies exploring. I was asking him this question. He was saying, like, think of it as like when you move to a new city. When you just arrive in a new city, everything is new to you. And so you want to try out all the different restaurants and cafes and stuff. Once you've been there 5 years and you sort of understand the rhythms of life, things become more predictable. So maybe in your neighborhood, a new cafe opens up, but you can look at it and with your experience, you're like, oh yeah, that's going to be the hipster cafe. And you already know I hate hipster cafes. And so there's no need for you to explore that because you have enough experience to strike it off the list right away. So the more experience you have, the more we can narrow our focus, which is, of course, comes with dangers because then you're like, who knows? Maybe that hipster cafe was going to be the greatest thing in the world and it was different and it would have attracted you. But we can take some shortcuts because we have experience of the world. And you can't, I guess one of the phrases Charlie Wu said that sort of stuck in my head is you can't regrow your expectations about the world. You can't unlearn what you already know. And so we can never be as purely exploratory as we were when we were 5. Like I can go tobogganing because I like tobogganing, but I'm never going to have the first toboggan down the hill that that I took my kids to. Like I already know what it's like to go down that hill. So, and I know, so of the many activities I could do on a snowy day, I have a sense of which ones I enjoy more than others and where I want to spend my attention. So yes, it's okay to explore less, but I would argue that the general trend is we err on the side of getting locked into routines a little too much. And most people could benefit from consciously and deliberately exploring more as they get older. And there's a subset of people when they do studies of exploratory behavior, there's a subset in one study, it was about 20% of older people who basically like never explore, even when it's clearly beneficial to explore. They're so locked into not embracing uncertainty. And that is, I think, pretty clearly pathological. That's a problem that is going to make your life less happy and less successful.
Well, and I just jotted down your quote from Charlie Wu. You can't unlearn what you already know. It seems like we need to put "know" in big time quotation marks, italics, et cetera, et cetera. How much do we know? Like, yeah, okay, if I formed that at 20 and I'm 58, do I know? The world was a completely different place at 20.
Do you still hate such and such a kind of food? Maybe artichokes are awesome. Actually, Brussels sprouts are a great example. It's like, I hated them when I was a kid. Now I love them. And it's like, have my taste matured? And then I read an article. It's like, no, it's through the sort of process of selective breeding. Brussels sprouts are now much less bitter than they were like 30 years ago. So it's not just that I've changed. It's also that the world changes. And, in the context of, I talked about multi-armed bandits, this sort of the slot machines that are used as a toy model for explore, exploit decision-making studies. Well, they also do what's called restless bandits, where the bandits, so, it's not just that one machine is 60% and the other is 40%. They're gradually changing. So it's 60%, but it's gradually drifting up or down and you don't know in which direction. And that makes the math a lot harder. Yeah. But it makes the solution is you need to explore more in a world. If you're doing a restless bandit problem, you need to be more exploratory than if you're doing a stationary bandit problem. And what is the world today? The world today is a restless bandit problem, and it's more restless than it ever has been. The pace of change is fast. Even the Brussels sprouts are changing. So you have to be constantly reevaluating your assumption. As you said, you have to accept that what you know is really just a hypothesis based on the observations you took sometime in the past.
Yeah, it reminds me of Ada Grant's book, Think Again. And maybe we never thought in the first place. We just grabbed onto it because a friend liked it that way or whatever. You mentioned the fact that as we age, there's less time to reap the benefits, and you touched on this a little bit with your last answer. So there's less time to exploit what we've landed on when we're in our 60s, then when we're in our 20s, et cetera. I'd written an article just, a couple months ago about, I called it the 88-year mentality. And the point I was trying to make was so many people that are in their 60s and 70s, even 50s, have in their head that the lifespan's about 72, 73. And maybe it was when you were born. It's not now. If you're healthy at 60, you're getting to 85, maybe more. If you're healthy at 72, you're going to be in your 90s, most likely. And that 88-year mentality, when you start saying, well, most likely I'll live to 88, it seems like that expands your desire to explore, or your willingness is probably a better term, to explore, because that opportunity to then exploit what you learn is much longer than if you think, well, I'm done at 72. What good is it to explore at this point? Does that play a role at all, this longer runway and awareness?
I think absolutely. I think and this is something that came up in talks in interviews I did with scientists. Like, one of them was like, yeah, we can say that the benefits of exploring decline as you get older, but if you're 60, you got
a long time.
In all probability, you've got decades to enjoy. And so why would you want to sort of narrow in and say, I'm just going to do the same things every day for the next 25 years? And, even you can push this, like, we talk about kids taking longer to grow up these days, and it makes sense. It's when you do the math on, like, you can think of, there's this Alison Gopnik, who's at the University of California, Berkeley. She presented this theory of childhood as a solution to the explore-exploit dilemma, that, as a species, we need people exploring, and we also need people exploiting in order to have successful societies and survive. And humans have an unusually long childhood, even compared to, like, chimpanzees.
Right.
And that her argument is, it's like, that is an optimal solution to the explore-exploit dilemma. You have this long period where you're wired to explore, and you think about how kids behave. They're so unpredictable. They're always wandering off. They can't pay attention. Well, they are wired to be exploring the world, to learn as much as possible about it, so that by the time they become adults, they know a lot and are able to exploit resources and be successful. And so if you consider that argument, then you can say, well, now that life expectancy has gotten so much longer, of course childhoods have gotten longer.
Sure.
And the world is also, it's more of a restless bandit. It's changing at a faster pace, and we have a longer time to enjoy it. Then we need a longer time to explore. So it's not surprising if kids are delaying their childhood. At least that's, as the parent of 8 and 11-year-old, I'm preparing myself for, okay, this will still be their room when they're 22.
Yeah. I just read, 2 days ago, that a child born today has a 50% chance, in developed nations, has about a 50% chance of living beyond 100. I mean,
wow.
That's just an interesting, simple, oversimplified, but an interesting data point for people to have in their heads. You talk about, and this was, Alex, I love how you built this in, the Holy Grail, seemingly the ultimate pursuit. And yet in the mythological stories, it wasn't really the case. It was like the reason they went, but then the real action happened. Had nothing to do with the Holy Grail. Talk us through that. I think that's a concept that will really hit home with the folks listening, is because we have these, whatever our version of the Holy Grail is, and we set out, and then the real adventure starts, and the Holy Grail never enters the picture again.
Yeah. So it's funny. I when I was sort of bouncing around ideas for what I wanted this book to be about, for a while I was actually thinking, like, maybe I should write a book on quests, because there's nothing more satisfying than being on a quest. And I could do the history of quests, and like where this idea of the quest for the Holy Grail came from, and how it's sort of changed over the centuries and stuff. One of the papers I came across was by a medievalist named Norris Lacey, was like called something like the Holy Grail as a MacGuffin.
Yes,
like,
yes. Exactly.
What the hell's a MacGuffin?
Right.
And so a MacGuffin is Alfred Hitchcock's term for, in his movies. In Alfred Hitchcock movies, he was like, you always need a MacGuffin. Well, what's a MacGuffin? It's what all the characters care about. It's like the secret papers, or the spy or whatever. But it turns out in all his movies, and he's given interviews about this, like, nobody cares about the MacGuffin. You never even see the MacGuffin in most of the movies. All that matters is that the characters care about it, and then it creates the action. And at the end of the movie, it's like, oh, and we save the papers, or maybe even never even hear about it. Like the Maltese Falcon. What is the Maltese Falcon? Which is not a Hitchcock movie, but anyway, what is the Maltese? It's not all that interesting or important. It's just that everyone cares enough that it creates all this action. And so Norris Lacey was saying, what, like in the Holy Grail tales, It's exactly what you said. The whole, you never actually like finding the Holy Grail is irrelevant. And in fact, in a lot of the Holy Grail versions of the story, the early ones, it's like Galahad, that they get the prophecy. Galahad is going to find the Holy Grail. Okay, Galahad's going to find the Holy Grail. Now let's all of us go look for the Holy Grail. It's like, wait, why are you other people going to look for we already know Galahad's going to find it. You're not going to find it. There is no point in, but it's like, no, that's not the point. We need to go and be on the quest for the Holy Grail. And then, as you say, all these great adventures happen, and we're glad they did. And it's lots of fun. But I think that's a kind of a super metaphor for, for life, I guess. Certainly for running, like I found, and we were alluding to this earlier. 100%. It's like this, I guess I would say running is what has taught me this lesson most clearly, of like being so obsessed with a goal, reaching it, realizing that the goal itself is essentially meaningless, but nonetheless being so glad that I was on the quest for it, because pursuing the goal was what was amazing. And so then it's like, okay, I need to set another goal. Now, I think there's a danger that we do want to stop to exploit or to enjoy the fruits of achieving goals that we set for ourselves. But ultimately, in a lot of cases, it really is, dating back to King Arthur and Galahad and the Holy Grail. It's the goal is the reason to be out there. And it has to be, you have to believe in it. You can't just sort of discount the importance of the goal, because otherwise you won't be willing to quest for it. But you have to recognize that achieving the goal isn't really what it's all about.
Well, and I think just that perspective is so freeing when you realize, or if you look back retrospectively and you look at your own life and you think of all the things that you've put in that role of the Holy Grail, and what actually happened on that trip, what actually happened on that adventure, what actually happened on that pursuit. My PhD when I was 50 years old became that thing. Yeah, it was cool to get the PhD, but the relationships built, the chance to speak with folks like Sam, Marcora, that you spoke to a lot for your first book, the chance to, it's exactly what you described. The PhD was a good goal, but it was the things that happen. And if people look back at those types of things in their lives, and then they maybe journal or explore or ponder, what really sparked me in that?
So, and I'll tell a little story about my relationship with that idea. When I was 28, that was a big transition year for me. It was the end of my serious running or track running career. This was 2004. I got a stress fracture a few months before the Olympic trials, and I realized that's it. Like I gave everything I could for 10 years to try and make the Olympics, and I'm not going to make the Olympics. And then I started journalism school a few months after that. So it's hard to have a dream, a 10-year dream,
100%.
Kind of wave goodbye to it. But, and I was a little bit sad, but I was also like, I thought about it. I thought a lot about it. Like, believe me, this was a time of big transition. And I thought about it, and I thought, man, that was an amazing 10 years. I had so much fun. I can't imagine anything that would have made this past decade more meaningful to me or more fun than the pursuit that I was on, this just like trying so hard. And there were lots of like, extrinsic pleasures like traveling. I got to race all around the world. That was great, but also just the intrinsic pleasure of like, man, of finding out what you're made of being willing to commit to. So it was all good. And I was like, okay, I had this dream. I spent 10 years of my life doing this, and I didn't do it. And it was amazing. So then that helped me apply that lens to journalism and to compare it to the path that I was on, which was physics. I was working as a physics researcher at the time.
Still makes me laugh. And
one of the sort of thought processes that I had was, what can I dream of? What's my dream of, or my MacGuffin or my Holy Grail in physics? Like, well, I've gone far enough to know that I'm not going to like revolutionize the world. I think I could have a career as an academic physicist, be a professor somewhere, do some research, maybe expand the borders of the adjacent possible by a few millimeters or whatever. What could I do? And that would be fun. Like, my dad was an academic, and he had a good, like, work-life balance and was able to pursue his interests. So I that was a good option. But when I thought about journalism, I thought, even at the time, I thought, what would be amazing? Imagine if I could be like a Runner's World columnist where and my vision of that at the time was like, okay, it comes out once a month. So 29 days, you're just kind of hanging out, chilling, going for runs. And then one day you write a column and it comes out in the make. So maybe I wasn't super realistic, but I had this dream of like, wouldn't it be great if I could be if I could be like in control of my own time, writing about the things that interested to me. So having a chance professionally to write about, whether it's music or travel or running or science or things like that. And I thought that is a goal that's worth working towards. And then but then I asked the secondary question of like, how happy would I be with that choice if I got towards the end of my career and realized that wasn't in the cards for me, that I wasn't going to do that, but that I was going to be in some other role, whether it's, this was 2004. So I was saying maybe I'll be, covering City Hall for the local newspaper. Now local newspapers don't have City Hall reporters anymore. But anyway, and I thought, no, that still sounds fun to me. Being on that path of trying to get articles published in Runner's World or trying to get to that point and learning the craft and doing that sounds like a fun journey. And so a big part of my decision or my willingness to jump out of physics and go to journalism was the feeling that there was a better MacGuffin there for me, that was something that I was actually willing to strive towards, and that I would be satisfied even if I would enjoy the journey even if I didn't make it to the destination, just like I had with running, as opposed to physics where I could see the journey much more clearly and kind of knew where I might end up, but it didn't sort of fill me with passion.
Well, and that's a great lived out example of what we were talking about 20 minutes ago, of always choosing the option with the biggest potential upside. You saw this could happen here. It may not. And this will probably happen here. Okay, there's my answer. And it wasn't that simple, but okay, I got to admit, you got me with the story of Joe Campbell. I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, Joseph Campbell. But his quote about all of his peak experiences, this is a guy who traveled the world, spoke to generational leaders, created a best-selling book, indirectly influenced Disney films of all things. He said there's a kind of mystical, I'm quoting you now, there's a kind of mystical bliss that comes when the body is overtaxed. Running, of all the things he did that, I think I know the answer because you've spoken so highly about your own running, but was that a little bit of a surprise at least?
So to me, there's a few different sparks for where that came together to make me want to write this book. And one of them was the discovery that Joe Campbell, I'm so glad that you fell for the Joe Campbell thing. I'm so glad because that was very deliberate. So the discovery that he was not just a runner, but a world-class runner. And I think it was Michael Joyner, the Mayo Clinic physiologist who mentioned that in an email. And I was like, what? Come again? And it made so much sense to me because all this stuff about the hero's journey, it just it maps onto the experience of endurance challenges so well. This idea of setting out on a quest and, trying to refuse the call, but then feeling like, no, I have to do that, and meeting a mentor, all these things. It's just like, this is like, it's a metaphor for life, but it just fits with being a runner. So anyway, I filed that away in the old mental desk drawer, and I knew I wanted to dig deeper and kind of figure out, okay, so there are these it was a couple of interviews towards the end of his life, one of which was with Bill Moyers, where he
it turned into the big book.
Yeah, that's very famous. He makes a sort of passing reference to, the big moments, the whole thing in a nutshell, zing, that, running. That was, a couple of races. So I was like, what were these races? How fast was he? And so it took a little digging to find out that he was talking about, I think it was the 1925 Penn Relays, where he ran within a second of the world record at the time for 800 meters. He had this journey, and was there some hyperbole that was the best moment? Maybe not. I don't know. It's like, okay, I always want to be cautious. Like I have a wife and kids. Of course, those were the greatest things in my life.
Right.
But there's a couple of races in my life that I look back to, and it's like, it's hard to imagine a more intense experience than the last, minute of those races where it's like, oh my God, the world is exploding. This is everything. This is the whole thing in a nutshell. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to find that Joseph Campbell was a runner, but not like, I didn't find it hard to believe once I discovered it.
Well, and I think you quoted him as saying it probably wouldn't have mattered if he'd won that race or not. It was the fact that there was the need to put himself in that position to press to the very extent of his abilities. And had he lost, it still would have been a peak performance. That seems powerful too.
Yeah, I'll admit that's me making that's not him saying that. That's me interpreting his words. Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's. I mean, when you read his comments, it's not about, man, the feeling was so good to win that race. What he's saying is that feeling 80 meters from the line when the race wasn't decided yet. That was the moment that was his peak experience. So it wasn't about the celebration or the he was front page of the New York Times. Like this was back then, these sorts of races were big news at the Penn Relays. So he was briefly famous, but that's not what he remembered. What he remembered is the moment when he was pressed to the maximum and there was no reserves being held back.
And is that your mention of him saying, the follow the bliss should have been follow your blisters, because people thought, oh, follow your bliss is supposed to be easy. Is that the additional lesson you pulled out from his stuff of the hero's journey? It really needs to involve effort, and optimally at the extreme, almost the Csikszentmihalyi's where challenge and capacity meet up.
Yeah. So this is, I think, a really important idea that, because in parts of the book, I'm talking about exploring and about following your interests and just making it, sometimes it starts to sound like this, oh, it's just so fun. It's just like playing. But I mean, if you read the journals of explorers, there's, maybe there's an element of play, but a lot of it is, there's a lot of trials and tribulations and suffering. And I think even if you extrapolate that back to the other forms of exploration we're talking about, whether it's listening to new music or career decisions, it's like a fundamental part of exploring is that there's a real chance of failure, and you're probably going to have to encounter some struggle, whether that's just, listening to a very bad album is maybe not the worst form of struggle, but yeah, it's not for free. Like, you have to work at it. And what I found interesting in digging into this area is there's this idea in psychology called the effort paradox. The idea that having to put in effort, the fact that something is hard doesn't subtract from its value in some cases. Sometimes it does, but in some cases it actually adds to the value. We like it more because it was hard. Right. Climbing the mountain by the hard route is more valuable than climbing the mountain 100%. By the escalator. And this is like an ongoing area of research. It's like, why is this? It's really hard to put your finger on the exact mechanism, but one of the lines of research that comes out of this is that if you ask people what brings the most meaning to their lives, and meaning that they can't necessarily define what they mean by meaning in their lives, but people can intuitively sort of understand what you're asking. The things that bring meaning to people's lives tend to be things that involve effort, that involve struggle and pushing hard, whether that's running a marathon or having kids.
Right. Well, I appreciate all your time. I got one more I want to touch on before we wrap things up. The last sentence of your book reads, "But I'm less worried about running out of opportunities to explore because they're all around us." I couldn't help but think maybe tweaking that to read, "because they're all around and within us." I just on a personal level, I'm more curious about the internal exploration. How fast can I run at 60? Where will my curiosity about subject A, what will that reveal? Are those internal explorations? And I think you touched on this right out of the gate when we were chatting today, but are those internal explorations cousins of the external, or are they separate in their genesis?
No, I think they're not, maybe not even cousins. They're like brothers or siblings. And you can argue that from a neuroscientific perspective, that if you're exploring physical terrain, you're exploring a new continent, you're mapping that in your hippocampus. But if you're exploring new ideas, you're meeting new people, you're listening to new music, you're also mapping those ideas or those social relationships in your hippocampus. That it's literally the same process of exploring new areas and slotting them into how they fit into what we've already known or encountered. So the internal exploration and the external exploration, they're the same. And so that last sentence is my sort of acknowledgement that I started out maybe this journey as a guy who was really focused on getting as far off the beaten track as I could, of going to, some really hard to reach backcountry areas and doing really stupidly hard hikes or canoe trips. And I love that. I still love that for a lot of reasons. But the realization that the itch that I'm trying to scratch there, it doesn't require that I go to some specific location that people don't generally go to. It requires doing something that's new and interesting and challenging to me. And that's something I can do down the hill from me, 1 block away in the park, or it's something I can do sitting in my chair and listening to ABBA for the first time and realizing, hey, 7 billion other people already know this song, but I've never heard it before. And it's awesome.
Right. Love that. Alex, thank you so much. It's great stuff. Keep it up. We'll get you on in 7 years when your next one comes out. But anyway, awesome job. Congratulations. Excited to see where this takes things.
Thank you, Brad. This has been a really fun way of exploring some of the ideas. It's really interesting to see where you've bounced off with them.
All right. Well, that ties a ribbon on part 2 of the interview with Alex Hutchinson about the explorer's gene. If you missed part 1, you can just pop back to the last episode and roll right into what you got to hear today. Thank you for joining us here on the Coaching Lab podcast. Really appreciate it. You got literally a million options out there. And we appreciate you saying, you know what? This is part of my routine. So thank you very much. Thanks for sharing the news. If you have any questions on the coaching front in terms of your own career and where you're going with this, either as a clinician or it's a side job or something you want to jump into with both feet, reach out anytime. Results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. We'll set up some time to talk through your situation and where you're hoping to go with things. Or you can access details on the website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And now, it's time to be a catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching. I will speak with you soon on another episode of the Coaching Lab podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.